Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. Before I introduce my guest, please remember to subscribe and like Should Have Listened to My Mother podcast wherever you choose to listen. There are so many places to find us, including YouTube. We would certainly appreciate your support and feedback, and we would certainly really appreciate those 5-star reviews. It's such a pleasure to host this show each week, and I'm honored to be able to share these deeply personal stories, even life-altering stories, and they should not be forgotten or kept in a box. My guest is an Olivier Award-winning actor. He's passionate about stage acting, film, and TV. He was born in Huntsville, Texas, and eventually moved to Houston, where he worked as a prison guard. His acting career began over 30 years ago when Russell Andrews took a friend to an audition. Today, Russell Andrews is an actor, director, producer, author, and founding member and producing artistic director of Stage Walkers Productions, an LA-based stage company. Stage Walkers has received many awards, including over 30 LA Theater Award nominations, with wins that include 2 NAACP Theater Awards, just to name a few. Some of Russell Andrews' film and TV credits from over the years include the Marvel film The Punisher, Straight Outta Compton, One's Runaway Island, Lifetime's Michael Jackson, Searching for Neverland, Better Call Saul, NCIS New Orleans, HBO's Sterling and Insecure, and so much more. Hi, Russell. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you, and good morning.
Russell's on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. Russell, I also want to mention your new book, Shoes. So we're going to get into that later as well, because that's a pretty great story and significant lessons.
She is throughout the book. As we talk about it, you will hear why. But the book itself is based on an actual event, and then the rest of it is actual events in my life. So we'll get to that whenever you want to.
Okay. So the woman that instilled or inspired or initiated these events of your life, tell us what your mom's name is.
Yes, my mom is, her name is Dorothy, and born and raised in Huntsville, Texas. And she was one of 4. She was a drum major in the band. Not drum major, she was a drummer, if you will, in the band in her high school. And she was the good girl with respect to whoever and whatever. She was just, very not quiet, but she was a woman of faith, and she was quite funny. One of the best things, I think, we all think that there are great things about our parents, or at least I pray we do, is that she could laugh at herself. And my mom loved literature, reading and writing, and I don't know if that had anything to do with my career choice, but she loved it. And I don't know the effect it had on her life, other than it always piqued her curiosity to read, to research, to study, and to combine that with her care about people and humanity. And she is very instrumental, I will say, in my writing, because I try to, without the cliche, channel my feelings, my thoughts, my history with her as I write, because the struggle over the years to get the book done was the truth of it. I didn't want to sensationalize, but how do I tell the truth? And we'll get into that later. How do I tell the truth and omit some facts about my upbringing? However, I didn't want broken glass. I didn't want drugs and crime. I didn't want that. But I did want the story told through the POV of the 11-year-old and his mother. And subsequently, again, though it is fact based, I find myself hearing my mom's voice and wondering how she would feel to have read it.
You just mentioned you wonder how she would respond to reading this book. If she wasn't happy with you doing your schoolwork or homework, what kind of responses would she give you, if whether it was discipline-based or encouragement?
I have to tell you something. It's very that is a very good and very answerable question. My mom never really had a problem with us in schoolwork. And I say not so much that she was the disciplinarian. It wasn't that she wasn't. But Jackie, my mom, for many years, until my children came, was my best friend. And I was hers. And she loved my brother. That was never in doubt. But we had a connection. She called me baby. I was the youngest of all the cousins in that group coming up, and everyone did. My cousins, my grandmother, my aunt, I'm baby, even now. My aunt, I saw her a couple of months ago, and I'm still baby. But I say that to say that my mom never had a problem with us in discipline and what have you. She raised two boys. And my father was there. I'll always speak about she and my aunt, my grandmother. My father did what he could. He did what he knew. We were Southern men growing up in the South, not devoid of emotion, but we learned how to cloak it, if not just suppress it altogether. And his upbringing was very rural. He didn't start school until he was 10. And he fell in love with my mom at some point, if not love, it was infatuation that moved to love. And he operated, and I'm saying this for a reason, he operated from a position of never wanting to lose her. And subsequently, as she grew and he kind of stayed in his station, if you will, he worked. He was never without work. He wasn't afraid of it. Thus, we weren't either. But I say that to say that my mom held us closer because there was this very interesting dynamic going on in the house as she grew in the nursing part of her life and a little more education, a little more exposure. His was still in the world of the laborer, though he worked with and for some people, he always saw himself as not inferior, but he never felt that he was what my mom was. He loved her, he respected her, but he was afraid of her growth. And to that created something in my mom that I don't think she knew. I mean, whoever knows what we're going to be tomorrow or a year or whatever from now. But she became something else to us that I don't think she even considered growing up or, getting married and having kids. And what that was, she gave us more room to discover, more room to grow, a safe place to fail. And she didn't react from a point of anger or strict discipline, but as with a little hope and optimism. How can we better that? One of the things she would always say to me is she would say, baby, you never know when someone's watching you. So if you know better, do better. And so that became part of everything I did in my life. So I was never afraid to tackle anything. And if she was over my shoulder, whether she was there physically or in my spirit, I welcomed it. And when there was time, because we were latchkey kids, when there was time for her to be home and there with us, it was a joy. So I never felt any fear or any intimidation, from my mom in terms of our discipline, academics, or whatever. So she would be here word for word, but she would make sure that the grammar was correct because, again, she loved language and she loved literature.
What age was she when they got married, your mom and dad? Very young?
Oh my God, my mom was, let me see, 58, 40. My mom was 19 years old.
Right, so she's
And they were,
discovering and trying to figure out who she is, and she was wise enough to let you and your brother have that freedom or
yeah.
ability to think on your own or see what your interests are as opposed to clamping down and say, do it my way or the highway.
Oh, absolutely. One thing my mom would say to me is that, living in Huntsville was a wonderful life. You know what you know. You know that there is more somewhere else, but you also know that there is far less. The way they were brought up, the less would only be material things. If there were, I can't imagine there being more love and respect in a household than hers. It's not without any flaws. I'm not trying to paint this pristine thing, but life has balances. You hope life has challenges, but my mom was happy, and while I will be honest, and she did not want to get married, but she was marrying a guy who had a little vision, a little hope. He wanted something. And again, not that the others didn't, but he was persistent. And at some point she said, okay, I think I can do this.
Right.
The rest of that story,
Okay, well, we'll leave that for the next conversation.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about, because I'm curious what her upbringing was like and your maternal grandmother, because you have a pretty tight-knit, extended family, it seems like.
Watch this. Very, very rural. Huntsville is small. When I was born, there was 3,000 people when I was born, total. There was the central unit for the prison system, the Walls unit in Texas Department, and it was also the home of Sam Houston State University. And you either worked at one or the other. In the perfect world, you either spent time at one or the other. I shouldn't say that with a smile, but there's a reality to
You're
all of that.
either on one side of the wall or the other. Is that?
And we literally grew up. I mean, when I say behind the walls or around the walls, there was an area called the Flats, which no longer exists because the school bought that territory, but it was right behind the prison. We would walk past the walls to church, to the grocery store, which was the big one in Huntsville, was Piggly Wiggly. It was a grocery store.
Oh, they're the best. They're in South Carolina. I love Piggly
Oh,
Wiggly.
well,
I have a
there you
Piggly
go.
Wiggly
Yeah.
baseball cap.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it still existed. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. But my grandmother worked for a family. I do not remember how she met the family, but they were a very prominent family in Houston. The mother, the mom, the woman, if you will, Blanche Williamson, was this socialite, if you will. And her husband was this pilot. He was in the military, but he was a pilot for United. And my grandmother was a domestic and a maid of sorts, and she worked out of this country club setting at Lake Livingston, which is still there. One thing led to another. She met the Williamsons who would like to employ her. And they did. And they would send a car for her, or she would get a bus ticket and go to Houston, and she would stay with them for weekends or extended periods of time as a maid to them in all of their social events. And she was about four. She was 4'9", almost 5'2". And over the years, that they became the extended family, so much so that there's a chapter in the book about Miss Williamson. That's how important she was to the family. And subsequently, when my mom was married and moved to Houston, that was the first quote unquote job that she had, was with the Williamsons. So my grandmother and my mom both worked for the Williamsons. However, they helped, I would say put my mom through, but some of her work paid for it also. But they put my mom through nursing school at Alvin Community College, and that domestic, who came from a domestic who worked for the Williamson family, was now a nurse and, registered. She was an LVN, then registered, and then private duty nurse. And it all came from, not all, but mostly came from the support of the Williamson family. And it was interesting because my mom didn't go to college right out of school. Obviously, I said she got married. My father didn't go to college either. In our family, it was my brother and then myself, and I went playing football. And yeah, and her life changed everything. There were doctors, there was hospitals, there was clinics, and and more nurses and whatever, local conferences and things there. And her world was expanding, and she took the time to take us along with her. I say us, my brother and I, and my father, to whatever extent he could or wanted to go. And she changed the trajectory of what was normal in my family. And her sister also ended up being a nurse as well, but not the same journey. But yeah, Mom, she did more actually than she spoke of. And because she felt like it was all, destiny. She was a woman of faith and she never questioned it. I tend to think that it may have, I won't say stifled some growth, but it was rather challenging for her to hold her faith and then to see things play out the way they did in her life. I'll let that sit right there.
Well, I mean, I imagine she's kind of torn between her lives, between the Williamson family and the gifts that they gave to your grandmother and to your mom, and then wanting to take the boys with her, seeing that there's a possibility for them to have a significant future, and then concerned with your dad's situation. I'm curious, did she ever talk to you specifically about how wonderful this family was and they helped her, or how important it is to get on a track? Did she ever talk to you about the dynamics of this family helping them and what doors it opened for her, and something that you guys should keep in mind for your future?
Jackie, I lived it. So, yes, she spoke about it, but when we were able to, we spoke about it with her. The Williamsons were in our family pretty much, I won't say from my birth, but that long. I read last year the last email that I received from Miss Williamson speaking about my mom to me. My mom passed in 2011, but Blanche Williamson was a friend of the family beyond the employee. She they paid for my grandmother's open heart surgery because she knew Mr. DeBakey and some others in the Texas Medical Center. When my mom would have to go to the house, we would go with her because the Williamsons had a guest house. And it had, again, it's spoken of in Shoes in the book. And it had, the bed, the kitchen, the phone and the television. And it was behind the house. And so, yes, she spoke of it, but we lived it. And so we saw it. And you have to also understand, and forgive me for this was mid to late 60s. And these were some interesting times. And for that to be, first of all, a place of employment, but also a safe place. And I don't mean we didn't grow up in a safe area. I won't even debate that. But I mean safe in terms of welcomed. We weren't made to feel like we were guests or we had to go out in the back and stay, unheard and unseen. That was our place that they provided, and they gave free reign. And they had two boys that we grew up with. Mm-hmm. Mark and Stephen were our friends. Hell, Mark and I shared the same birthday. They were older than both of us, but there were hand-me-downs and exchanges of toys. Well, not so much an exchange. They would give us that, and Miss Williamson would make sure that whatever the boys didn't use that didn't need anymore, in first place would be us. And because they were very comfortable family, these were nice things. And the toys and the books and the time. I have to stress that the time that we shared was so valuable, whether there was a pair of shoes, whether it was pants, whether it was food or whatever. Those two boys who were so affluent never talked to us or looked at us or treated us like we weren't part of their daily lives. We were, I guess the thing now is popular to say the brother from another mother. And my mom worked for them. It was never a doubt about who she was, but they treated her with the respect of any other human. And it's funny because outside of that immediate situation, that home, that thing of us all taking the bus over there or whatever, or mom, had an old car, my dad had an old truck or whatever. We'd go over there and do the work, take the bus home. We never felt anything but excitement on the way. It wasn't until I got older that I realized that other dynamic, and the title and the label and the perception, that came out of the hood, mom working for these white folks.
What was it like as a young boy to all of a sudden realize what the reality of the real world was? The conflict of the respect that you're getting with this wonderful family, and then you step out into the real world. Was it mind-boggling? Was it rattle your brain? Or your mom taught you to stand tall and proud, I would imagine?
We always did that. As a matter of fact, even my dad, in his limited education and exposure, we were always taught that, and it was never deterred. And within the Williamson family, matter of fact, it was supported. You have to know who they were to understand what that meant for my mom, that when we left home to go there, we were still at home, given all the detail, if you will. So going out into the world, going to high school, which we went across town. I was able to go to private school because they came across town, if you will, to get athletes to go to their school. I happened to be one. one of the many, but that was part of my education. So the real world was interesting because I would go from the hood where I grew up in South Park, and I would go across town, and these areas were different. Kids with cars driving to school and their money and the things that they would do. It was, I will not say culture shock, but it was sometimes humbling because I found myself asking, how did I get here? Why am I here? And, there were those who didn't receive it well at the school, but for the most part, they didn't care. I even learned that and taught it to my children. These people, if you will, don't hate you. They just don't think about you in that way, in terms of equal and in terms of being inclusive.
Well, they were never taught. They were never taught what the Williamsons taught their children.
They did. They did. And I was lucky. I was lucky.
Yeah, very lucky. And all of you and your mom has a lot to do with why you got involved with the Stage Walkers, right? You wanted to get the young actors and the talent involved and have them commit and engage in things.
On both sides of the curtain. And that's why I started it. And one thing led to another, not for the awards. I mean, we all want to be recognized as a set of a certain amount of vanity that comes with it. Also in pride that comes in the work we do. But I was exposed to it early, and I wanted to share it. And it took off, and it did really well. And I've had my kids involved in things that I've done, and they've worked as actors as well with me. However, they've chosen better paths at this moment.
Well, that's, you know what? Again, that's another conversation.
Yes,
but we've dabbled into a little bit of what Shoes is like. Your book, your most recent book, your first book, correct?
Yes, my first. I've had it for 37 years, and I finally got it out of my mind, out of my heart, onto paper, and it's being received really well here in UK. It's being bought in other countries, so I'm happy.
You're happy you put that all out there. There's a lot to learn from this book.
Yeah, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that. The main character is Junior, and I met him but never spoke to him in a Salvation Army. It was a thrift store that I go to from time to time, but for no other reason. They weren't foreign to me growing up. And I saw the family, and I could not stop watching them. And as it turns out, the family was in there shopping as if they were in Macy's or, wherever, right?
Sure.
And they were in there shopping because the mom was getting married the following day. And so, again, the things we throw away, people make lives out of.
Absolutely.
And it was being shown to me right there at that moment, and I was stunned, and I didn't want to forget it. So it was, how do I make a story out of this? And it was given to me. Again, I say this respectfully. I'm not the most religious person, but I know when I'm being tapped on the shoulder.
Yeah, and your mom was tapping you on the shoulder.
No, the woman, she was my mom. The little boy was me. Mm-hmm. And again, when I tell you, my mom was an inspiration for me driving through this, because that woman was a domestic. And that young boy was with her. And I'll send it to you and you'll read it. But again, that woman in there, I gave her the name. I never heard the name. The young boy's name in the book is Junior because that's all I ever heard the woman say to her. Mm. She's referred to as Mama because that's all I ever heard. They didn't talk to me. I was a voyeur. I was following them around. I felt bad about it, but something said, listen. And I did. And that hour or so in that store, quote unquote, I learned so much about me and them, and I saw myself. I saw my brother, but I saw my mom. And those kids, he had two little brothers, our brother and sister, they didn't think they were in Salvation Army.
No, not at all. Isn't that
they were with their mom,
a blessing?
And they were safe, yeah.
Oh, Russell Andrews, you've got my head and my heart spinning now. I can't wait to read it in full. The book is called Shoes. And I thank you so much for joining me on Should Have Listened to My Mother.
For the time. Thank you.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.